any number? Okay. Our trip was to go and preach on a Sunday at, I thought it showed up a little bit better than that, but at Providence Baptist Church in Mobile, Alabama. And I actually got to preach in that church many years ago in a fellowship meeting. And these fellowship meetings started at 10 o'clock in the morning. They'd go till like 9 o'clock at night. And at this particular fellowship meeting, we preached from 10 till noon and had lunch. Anybody know what good you are after 2 hours of preaching and then a good Baptist lunch? You're not good for anything. Okay? So anyhow, we made our way back in there. We had preaching then from after lunch, and we were going to break maybe about 5 o'clock and then go have supper. Well, we had a guy about 3:30 in the afternoon that he got to preaching. And it was one of those, you know, instead of being called Reverend so far, his name was Never End so forth. Yeah. And he went for a long time. And I remember that may be the time, I'm not sure, maybe the time where I wrote that little note to my wife that said, "Here I lay me down to sleep." The sermon is long and the subject is deep. If he should quit before I wake, please nudge me with a gentle shake. Amen. So this guy preached on and on and on. When he got done, the preacher mercifully had us all stand up and sing a song. And my wife, she's been nudging me all this time, trying to get me awake anyhow. And so I said to her, I don't know who's going to be preaching the next message, but he's got his job cut out for him. Yeah. And we're talking about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. About that time, we're singing. And the host pastor, who picks out the guys who are going to be preaching, he comes up beside Mrs. O'Neill and me, and he hands me a lapel mic. And he says, "Brother O'Neill, would you please bring the next message?" So the Lord... Are you saying my sermon was right? But anyhow, that was like 45 years ago earlier, and we came back and preached in the same church. Pray for Brother Roger Randall, pastor of the church. His wife is the daughter of the man who probably affected me the most as a minister would, Brother Leroy Wright. And they are still pastoring. He's still pastoring in this church now. Providence Baptist Church, Mobile, Alabama. There's just a better picture of it. Roger Randall. Yeah. This is Roger Randall. This is his wife, Karen. I tell you what was funny. Yeah, y'all give assistance back there if you will, brother. I tell you what was funny is Sister Karen Randall looks so much like Mrs. Wright. She looks so much like her mother that Mrs. O'Neill, as she is wont to do. Anybody been called the wrong name by Mrs. O'Neill besides me? She called Sister Karen Mrs. Wright probably 20 times. Said, "Mrs. Wright, Mrs. Wright, Mrs. Wright." And Sister Karen didn't have the heart to tell her Mrs. Wright's dead, you know. But anyhow, there we are. Can y'all see that? Miss O'Neill, you look wrinkled.
That's okay.
Go ahead. There we are at a fish house, and we had a good time. Go ahead.
Oh, that's good.
That almost looks like a picture in the background. But that was what was through the window. It's really nice. I think we used this for our Christmas card last year. Okay. Sure, it's got to get better. It's snowing.
Oh, it is.
Keep going. Okay. I preached all day Sunday at Providence Baptist Church in Mobile, and you can't see this good. Is there a way to focus that in any way to see if we might be able to read it? Because I thought you could read it, but
oh no,
there's no way to focus it good.
not any better than I know, sir.
Okay. This is.
I'm sorry.
I'll just let you. This is Fisherman Baptist Church. They have a great big church plant, real nice church building and all. And I've known this pastor for many years, and sorry that it's not a better picture. I thought it was better than that. I go ahead to the next one, but this is in a place called Bon Secours, Alabama. That's the pastor, right over there. and his wife. I guess y'all recognize me and my wife. What's his name, baby?
Oh, Sean Major.
This is Brother Sean Major. I think his wife's name's Carrie, isn't it?
No, his wife's name Jerry.
Okay, Sean.
No, it's Lyrica. Lyrica.
Yeah, she goes Larry for short.
Yeah.
Lyrica, L-A-R-R-I-C-A. Sean and Lyrica Major at Fisherman Baptist Church, Bon Secours, Alabama. And like I say, they got a great big building, probably about 1.5 times of ours. Very, very sweet people.
Yes.
He's been there for a long time and had the privilege of preaching for them on Wednesday night as we got ready to come back from that little trip that we made last year. Okay, brother? All right, here's the exciting part.
Lambert's, yeah.
There's it.
If you've never been here, you need to go sometime.
Yeah.
This is in Foley, Alabama. It's called Lambert's Cafe. And because of our screen up here, you may not be able to read it well, but they've given you the website for the business right there underneath Lambert's Cafe. And the website is called throwedrolls.com. That's THROWED, throwedrolls.com. It's kind of like a Cracker Barrel. It's bigger, and I'll let Ms. O'Neill tell you about it sometime. But they come around, they bring you food. Whatever you order, they come around every so often, they bring you food. And while you're ordering and figuring out what you're going to order, they start you off by putting a great big old paper towel on your table there in front of you. Then they come by with a great big old stainless steel bucket. And I think the first one, may have had fried okra.
Yeah.
Anybody like fried okra?
Yeah.
And they said, fried okra? I said, yes, sir. And they dig a big old ladle down in there and just put it all over your towel. And so while you're thinking, you can be munching on fried okra. And they do that every so often. They bring by green beans and cornbread and stuff like that. Like I said, it's like a great big old Cracker Barrel. They got all kind of old stuff in there. But this is one, if you ever go through the lower part of Alabama, look for Foley, Alabama, and go to Lambert's Cafe. If you're ever going up to Branson, Missouri, anybody been to Branson? Branson, Missouri, they've got one of those up there if you happen to be up there. Okay. This we are standing out front. Okay. Okay, here's what I think this is.
What do you think?
I think this used to be our lot that Mrs. O'Neill and I lived on in 1972 at a little trailer park. Just anybody know Pensacola? Is just off of 29 and 95, Halifax. They go there side by side. In between there was a Western wear store that for a long time got me to wearing boots every day. There's a Western wear store there, and he had a trailer park. Any of you have heard me tell the story about coming in from visitation with my pastor and us looking for the ladies, and his wife and my wife were stuck in the car and they were just not moving, and we didn't know why it was. And he and I were looking around, and then we saw galloping a St. Bernard coming around this trailer park's one drive that it had going all the way around. And I've never seen a St. Bernard. But yes, they're big. And he was galloping like a horse.
Yeah, he was.
And he was coming at us.
And he was hungry.
Now I understood why Ms. O'Neill was in the car. And I looked over top of the car, my pastor, Brother Jim Fleur, he looked back at me, and we got back in our car. But anyhow, that's where we lived that time. That's where I was living when I got put in jail for street preaching in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. Okay, when I surrendered to preach, I was asked to preach within about a week of arriving in Pensacola, Florida. Surrendered to preach up in Maryland. And I was asked to preach at a, what did they call it? Men's Brotherhood. Anybody been to a brotherhood? Yeah. Called it Men's Brotherhood night. And I preached that night on a Thursday night at First Baptist Church, Cantonment's Men's Brotherhood, but it wasn't held at the church. And the preacher was there. He liked it so much, he recommended me to preach, or recommend my sermon, to the pastor of this church, Farm Hill Baptist Church, in Farm Hill, Alabama, just right up the road. And he said, well, you reckon he could come preach that message at my church for breakfast? So I didn't know anything about preaching messages, but I got to preach that message at Thursday night. Sunday morning, I went to preach to these guys breakfast, and that's their sign. That's their church. Go ahead. And then this is where I preached. This pastor had me preach that message 3 times. I was so glad that he asked me to preach the same message, because that's the only message I had.
It was.
It really. I preached it to the Men's Brotherhood on Thursday night. I preached at Farmhill Baptist Church on Sunday morning. They had Brotherhood breakfast. Anybody been to Brotherhood breakfast?
Yeah.
And they had Brotherhood breakfast. I preached at that. Then he said, Brother Mike, he said, I really enjoyed that message. He said, you think you could preach that message at our church? First Baptist Church, Cantoma. Folks, you gotta understand, I was 18 years old, weighed about 110 pounds.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was a big deal to me.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, yes, sir, because between me and God, I couldn't say no. What's the story behind that? But I said, yes, sir. And he said, but do you think you could preach the same message that you preached Thursday night? And you folks don't understand what a relief that was.
Yeah.
You know, because I preached all I knew and then some. And so I got to preach at the First Baptist Church of Cantoma. It sure don't look as big there as it did when I was there. Okay, let's give another. And, okay, jump forward a few years. Well, it wasn't a few years. It was a few months. Jump forward a few months. Surrendered preach in March of '72, and within just a few months, I pulled out of the Southern Baptist Convention, never to return, and became a Bible-believing fundamental independent Baptist. And this is no longer that church, but these are the buildings where Mrs. O'Neill, and you wouldn't believe what a turmoil that was for Mrs. O'Neill. Does anybody remember mini skirts?
Yeah. Amen.
Y'all remember that? I'm not sure that was intended to get an amen in your mind, but that's okay. You folks probably can't imagine this, but back in those days, Ms. O'Neill and I were pretty worldly, and she wore miniskirts all the time back in those days. But we got straightened out a little bit on all that kind of stuff, you know, and I quit my gambling and all. No, I didn't. But anyhow, this was North Florida Baptist Tabernacle of Cantoma, Florida, back in those days, and that's where I got my training. Okay, and Jim Fleur was the pastor there, and for me, it was one of the greatest times of our lives. Was the beginning of the shaping of me for the ministry. Go ahead. And this may not look like much. This little rundown shack is where some dear friends of ours live. Probably my wife's best friends, mom and dad, for many years lived right there. That's in Bay Minette, Alabama, just up above Mobile. Go ahead, brother. Next. This is either the building or right next to the building where my wife's husband and me had us a little Saturday Christian bookstore for a while right there. Go ahead, brother.
Your husband and him.
Yeah, that's right.
This may be the same lot
Yeah.
where Mrs. O'Neill and I had a trailer that actually belonged to us in Bay Minette when I first started my first church, 1975. Faith Baptist Church, Bay Minette, Alabama. Okay, go ahead. What is that, Ms. O'Neill? Oh, this was our house. Within about 2 years, we were able to finance our own house. I think it's 1500 Moog Avenue, maybe. But you can't see it good. I'll show you another picture here in just a moment. We paid a top dollar. I think it was $11,000 for that house back in those days. And go ahead, brother. That's another picture of it. Go ahead. There's Ms. O'Neill sitting out front of it. Nobody, we couldn't get anybody to the door, so we just went ahead and helped ourselves take a picture. Okay, go ahead, brother. All right, and this building was our first church building that we actually bought. We met in a disabled American veteran building, first met in the house, met in a DAV building for a while, and then we were able to rent this. This was Corbett's store. It was a old grocery store. And we started our first church in there, Faith Baptist Church of Bay Minette, Alabama. I can't remember what the sign was on there. Some, I think, non-denominational charismatic thing now, 50 years later. But, and this, after we got all this done, we went by Pensacola, Florida, met some old friends. When I got put in jail, I was in the Navy, and I had to report to the disciplinary office of the admin building at Allison Field where I was at. The guy I had to report to was a yeoman, E5, second class, Thomas J. Morris. And Tom Morris, I witnessed to him. Tom Morris said he was saved, but he had little doubts about it because he's Free Will Baptist. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Anybody know Free Will Baptist, the difference? See, I believe he's here today, going tomorrow type of thing. And he had to do some praying and studying to get it all settled. But God worked it out. He came out of the Free Will Baptist denomination, went to the church I was attending. I wasn't pastor yet. Went to church I was attending there at the time. We became lifelong friends. Brother Tom just passed away. Just passed away, what's it been, maybe 3 weeks?
3 weeks.
Maybe 3 weeks ago. And that's his dear wife, Ann. Ann hated me because Brother Tom asked me one time at work in Edmonton, he said, Brother O'Neill, you don't believe in eternal security, do you? And I said, I sure do. He said, why? I said, the Bible teaches it. He said, really? And so every day it seemed like, when I would come to work, he'd stop me. And he had some verses to show me to prove you can lose your salvation. And his wife hated me because he came home every day, and instead of fooling around with her, he'd come home and he'd try to find verses to prove that I was wrong, that you could lose your salvation. Anyhow, he got a hold of the truth. We became lifelong friends, and I thank God for the Holy Spirit and what the blood of Christ can do.
Amen. Amen.
And I think that's it. That's good. If you get the lights, we'll crank up and